We'll call this April 17th, board work session to order. First off, thank you all for being here, especially on this sunny day. That's why we're closing the blinds behind me here because we don't want to remind ourselves of the beautiful day outside. We'll go ahead and do a call to order, roll call.
Kevin Alltucker,
Here.
Denise Diamond,
Here.
Mike Eister,
Here.
Austin Fulnagi,
Here.
Lisa Fragola,
Is excused.
Steve Mattel,
Here.
Zach Mulholland.
Here. All right, perfect. Next, we have the land recognition, Grant Matthews.
Good evening. I'd like to start our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya.
Excellent. Thank you. And also thank you for the NASA students for the magnificent powwow that was held here on this campus. So yeah.
Can I say
Oh,
something
yeah,
about
absolutely.
that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I really like to give a shout out to Avery Old Coyote and the whole group that put that powwow together. It was really outstanding. A lot of great energy and a lot of good support. And it seemed also that there was a good connection with OSU.
Absolutely.
So great job.
Wonderful. Thank you for that addition. Responses to information requests. Any questions, comments? All right, moving on. Adoption of the agenda. We have a motion
I'll move.
and we have second.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. And we'll go ahead and just do a roll call vote for adoption.
Kevin Alltucker,
Aye.
Denise Diamond,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Austin Fulnagi,
Aye.
Steve Mattel,
Aye.
Zach Mulholland.
Aye.
Excellent. We'll move on to discussion items. The first one is equity lens training. Dr. Baldry.
Yes, we have invited Deborah Butler, who is no stranger to Lane Community College, to conduct this training for the board, and I will turn it over now for Deborah.
Thank you. Can you hear me on the microphone? Okay. Okay. And I think I'm going to share some slides, but before I do that, I'll just give a quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Deborah Butler, and I used to work at Lane. I'm also an alumna of Lane Community College. I was a non-traditional student. I was a first-generation college graduate, and Lane played a really important role in my life. So I came to Lane. I transferred to the U of O. I went to law school at the U of O. I practiced law for a few years in the community and ended up coming back to work at Lane, where I worked from 2015 to 2022 and went to work at the University of Oregon, which is where I work now, where I'm the Associate Vice President for Campus Services and Chief of Staff in Finance and Administration. But Lane has always had a big place in my heart. I care about the college very much. And so I was really pleased to be invited back to talk about the equity lens, which is something else that I care about very much. And so thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm going to share a few slides. I'm assuming that I'm allowed to share.
And for those waiting online, we're just waiting for a share screen. Oh, no, nothing to be sorry about.
Have me as backup if you can.
I think I might need to have some backup. I'm sorry, Brett. Thank you. I'll just go ahead and get started though. Basically, I've kind of broken our discussion up into 4 separate parts that I thought would be, that would be useful for us to have this conversation. The first part is about design and development. So I was just going to give you a sort of a short explanation. Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
There we go. Okay. So I was going to share, whoops. Sort of a short explanation of the design and development process of the equity lens at Lane Community College and sort of how it came to be and how we how it was developed here, because the way it was developed is sort of created some unique features that I think are interesting for us to understand. The second part is I'm hoping that we can talk just a little bit about context and assumptions. And part of that is I just want to acknowledge that you all are public officials making decisions in a public way, and that there's sort of some different types of pressures and aspects of that kind of decision making. And just wanted to sort of open up a space to acknowledge those things and think about how the equity lens might be most useful to you in your decision process. I thought we could do some practice. So I have a totally made up, but not totally far out scenario. I'm hoping we can talk through a little bit and practice a little bit to see how you might like to use an equity lens tool in your decision making or in your processes and discussions. And then finally, I've left some time for questions and discussion. And really, I'm hoping that that is a time for you all to be able to sort of reflect and think about whether there are ways that you might like to integrate the equity lens into your normal decision-making practices and discussions. So we'll go ahead and get started here. My role in the equity lens development process at Lane was it started as an idea, and it was equity lenses were sort of being adopted in lots of different, mostly municipalities and nonprofits at that time, some K-12 organizations. We were seeing some adoption in higher ed organizations, not a lot yet. And at the time when we very first started talking about an equity lens, we thought we would be the very first community college that had sort of developed their own equity lens. And I think that would have been true if it would have happened right when we started talking about it. But it was an idea that took a long time to kind of come together. And so it wasn't really true by the time our equity lens was born here and we started using it. But we had conversations that I think started in early 2017. And I was an employee. I was a member of the Diversity Council at that time, which I'm remembering that there was something called a diversity team that was sort of before Diversity Council was part of the governance system. And so there was some members that were also part of diversity team that were joining those discussions. There were some past Diversity Council members who were joining in those discussions, and some people who were doing equity and inclusion type of work around campus. Obviously, there's a lot of that work happening across campus, a lot focused on students. And so some of those individuals were sort of invited to the table to join to start thinking about an equity lens. I worked really closely with Greg Evans at that time, who was the AVP of diversity, I think at that time. The title was later changed. And Sarah Lucia, who was a faculty member, who I believe is still a faculty member here at Lane. And she had a lot of involvement in those beginning stages. We hired an external facilitator to come and help us work through the process of creating an equity lens, because I think we were all aware that the creation and discussion and building of something like this together means that we all have our hands in it. And we were aware of the bias that we're all carrying with us and thought, how do we do this and try to remove as much bias as possible in the creation of the equity lens? And so we hired, his name was Phil Tujitsu Nash, and he was a professor of Asian studies at the University of Maryland. And he came and met with a larger group, so Diversity Council and some additional folks multiple times to sort of talk through what the equity lens might look like. We also created this communication tool that was called the Campus and Community Conversation Kit. That was something I was really proud of in my work at Lane. This was the first one. I think there were some after that. But the idea was that how do we tell people about this big idea that we don't have very well defined yet, and explain to them what it is that we're doing, where we want their feedback, and how their feedback will be counted in this discussion. And so the idea was, we're going to have a paper component, we're going to have an online component, we're going to tell you exactly how you can engage at every single point along the way. and how the information is going to be used, who's making decisions and how we're going about doing this. Just an effort to be as transparent as possible about how the project was working. We had multiple different, I'll call it a roadshow. I think I invited myself just about anywhere I could possibly be invited, every governance council, every department meeting, every work group meeting, everywhere I could possibly go to take this conversation kit, talk about the equity lens, talk about what we wanted to hear from people, hear what people had to say about what they thought about equity lenses, if they had any experience with equity lenses. And we had a lot of forums, we got a lot of feedback. And I think we did a session for the Board of Education at that time too. We did in-service sessions. During that time, as a group, we looked at hundreds of different equity lenses that were in use in different places, again, mostly municipalities, but the use was growing at that time during that year, 2017 and 2018. We created some common definitions, which is something we really didn't have before, and we thought was really important for us to be able to talk about access, equity, and inclusion. And so we created some common definitions that I'm not sure if they were perfect definitions, but they were common so that we could have conversations and make sure that we were talking about the same thing. We were really excited. I think that team was really excited about an equity lens as a way to integrate equity considerations into decision-making processes across the college. And one of the interesting things that happened, one of the big pieces of feedback that we received when we had all these different forums and surveys and things was that it was clear that employees it was mostly employees taking part in these processes, but there were a few student forums as well. And so we did hear from students. One of the things that employees said multiple times is that obviously, the work of the college is really focused on the student experience and on student access and achievement. And so the student experience is very important. But also, I don't know that there's a way for us to just focus on the student experience and not think about the employee experience or the experience of community members if we're all kind of seeing ourselves as part of an interworking community. And so that was something that we really thought a lot about. And it was something that made the Lane equity lens a little bit different from some of the other lenses that were in practice in other places that we had seen. And I'm just going to point out a few of the ways that the LCC equity lens turned out to be a little bit different from some of the equity lenses that we saw elsewhere. First, the equity lens was intended to be intersectional. So essentially the idea was we're all surrounded by power and privilege dynamics, right? Many of the equity lenses that we were seeing at that time were focused specifically on race. And we knew that race was important and something that we really needed to focus on, but there were so many other parts of identity that we knew were going to be important to talk about. There are lots of ways that power and privilege dynamics come into our lives and impact our relationships and the way that we do our work. And so we wanted to make sure that we created an equity lens that could address all those many parts. So intersectionality was an important part of that. We wanted to make sure that it was inclusive and multi-directional. So that sort of gets to that idea that employees said, we need to be able to see ourselves in this lens. We need to be able to think about where we are, where power and privilege dynamics impact us as employees and as people working with students, as well as thinking about the student experience and the experience of community members here. So the idea of the equity lens was that it would be used not only to analyze questions that were coming up as new questions, but also to look at processes and systems that were already in existence at the college, which has a long history and a lot of people with institutional memory to remember what things were like and what things are like now, and that we would be able to use the equity lens as a tool to think about what are these processes and systems that are in existence and how do power and privilege dynamics impact them. And the third thing that I wanted to point out was that the equity lens is expansive. And when I say expansive in this case, I'm thinking that the idea is not just a forward-thinking equity analysis of a decision that will impact the future, but the idea that we have a shared past and we have a shared community. And so there are people in our community who have been impacted in different ways. Anytime you come to the table, that's already happened, right? We all bring that with us. And so an equity lens needed to be a way to not only make a decision and co-create something positive in the future, but also to possibly address any kind of harms that somebody is bringing to the table and saying, I've been through this already here. I've worked here for 10 years and these things have happened to me, or I've seen these things happen to students. How are we gonna try to mitigate that? How are we gonna try to heal that so that we can move forward? Obviously, this is an ambitious project. This became much, much bigger than what we originally thought it might be. That is why maybe talking about the equity lens is a little bit complicated now because it was so ambitious and our idea was so big. But this is the direction that we moved in. This is how we move forward. Before we move forward in the presentation, I just wanted to mention, I should have said this at the beginning. If you have any questions or anything, I'm glad to answer them as we go. We don't need to wait till the end. And I'm glad to hear any of your reflections or questions as we go. And I also probably should have started by saying that an equity lens is generally a series of questions. And I'm assuming that you probably know that, but I realize sometimes I get a little bit ahead of myself and I'm talking about an equity lens, and it's an idea. But generally, the way that it's used is it's just a series of questions. And so that was sort of what we were trying to develop at the time. As we move on to kind of context and assumptions, I wanted to just share some thoughts about the ways that an equity lens can be useful in decision-making. The first way is that an equity lens can be a collaborative framework for decision-making. It's a way for us to raise and talk about equity issues in a systematic way. That's the beauty of it, is it creates a system that we can rely on so that we are less likely to have gaps in our information as we're making decisions together. An equity lens can acknowledge the needs of those who aren't at the table. The beauty of the equity lens is that it doesn't require us to wait until somebody comes and tells us what the impact might be on a person. So instead of waiting for somebody to say, if you make this decision in this way, or the way that this process works right now, it impacts me negatively in the following ways, and I'm going to educate you about that, right? You have some of those opportunities, certainly in your role, but the nice thing about the equity lens is you don't need to wait for that. So we can think about those who might not come forward and want to talk to the Board of Education about a specific decision, or might not even really be aware of it, right? You know that there are a lot of people who might be impacted by a decision that's being made in this room who are not really aware of how that might happen until it does. So the equity lens allows us to sort of dig in and be a little more proactive about that instead of waiting for those ideas to come to us. And then finally, an equity lens can be a method to illuminate barriers in equity so that they can be addressed. So it's a way to sort of shine a light on gaps that we might otherwise have if we don't use a systematic tool like this. All that said, there are some caveats that I would give you about an equity lens. One is that it's not a weapon. The people who are making the decisions still make the decisions, still hold the power. And the reason I mention that is because it is always possible that folks might use an equity lens as a way to say that a specific decision needs to be made in a specific way. And really, it's a tool for illuminating gaps and for looking at the whole picture. And so it doesn't really force anybody to make a decision in any particular way. The people who hold the power in terms of decision-making still hold the power in terms of decision-making. But if you choose to use an equity lens, it can certainly illuminate some of those gaps that we might otherwise have. An equity lens is not an equity Band-Aid or a quick fix. So using an equity lens, even if it's used carefully and systematically and every single time, does not guarantee a positive outcome for any particular group or person. And that is especially true when you're dealing with decisions that are made in constrained resource environments, which is everywhere. So that's something to think about. If you're making decisions that might have a positive impact on one group, they might also have a negative impact on another. And so that's something that just has to be taken into account. And the purpose of the equity lens is to think about both of those outcomes before you move forward.
Really quick question.
Yeah.
And by the way, first off, thank you for giving us the context and the history behind it as well. And I wanted to kind of ask just a little bit about more about the history. Was there any pushback towards this equity lens model as you were developing it, as it was going through the community and the community college and so forth?
You know, I wouldn't say pushback exactly, but there were some complicated conversations.
Yeah.
So first, I would say there was a group that was, you know, when we start talking about the equity lens, we're really talking about an idea, right? It's really hard to tell people like, what is it that you're talking about? Like, what is this equity lens? What does it mean? What is this about, right? So helping people conceptualize what it was that we were actually, what the goal was a little bit challenging. And then I would say that there was maybe, I'm thinking there were two groups of people. One group that perhaps was saying, look, we've been through lots of different equity efforts in the past. This seems like nothing new. We're not really, you know, what's the difference? I don't really trust this. This happened to me before. I've seen this go sideways. I'm not interested. And that definitely happened a little bit. And then I would say that there was another group who sort of said, an equity lens as a way to look at equity is not enough. That doesn't do anything, right? That is a tool that people who have power can use to continue to be in power and make decisions that may or may not be equitable to me or to some other group, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of distrust for sure. And explaining sort of how an equity lens might work and how it might not work was sort of part of what we had to define and talk about. So an equity lens can create some accountability in thinking through how decisions are made, but they don't force an outcome that is necessarily positive for anybody. And that is the hard part.
Understood.
Is that, you know, you can look at the outcome of a decision and say, that was not equitable. But there's a lot that goes into these decisions, and sometimes they're very complicated. And so it may or may not be equitable, or may not appear to be equitable at the time, but there were probably a lot of different considerations that went into it. So it was more about the process and using it as a tool to make sure that the process has integrity.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to really appreciate this slide and the fact that it's not a weapon, it's not a Band-Aid, and it's not a force of a specific outcome. And I really also appreciate the perspective that's a series of questions. We just really wanted to appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, so we're gonna get into a little bit of context here. And this is really, I just want to acknowledge, as I said in the beginning, that you are all elected officials, right? And you have held yourselves out as candidates and as elected officials, as people who want to serve and who want to make decisions on the behalf of the college. And I'm going to assume it's because you care a lot about the college and you want it to be a strong and positive institution, have a good impact. There are lots of different parts of ourselves that we bring to a role like this. So many of us might come into public service because of through communities of advocacy for one idea or another idea, and have support through communities of advocacy. Many of us, hopefully you didn't come into this role because you were hoping to get really rich or something, because that's unlikely to happen in this particular role. But that you want to serve, right? You want a strong community. You may have other kind of ideas about what it is that you want your community to be and to have. And so you're working toward that as part of your role as a board member. Your life experience and all the aspects of your identity are also parts that you bring to this, to your role as a board member, and comes into your decision-making. Things like race, age, professional experience, education, gender identity, socioeconomic status, all of those are things that you have lived and are ways that you see the world and experience the world that you bring to your role as a board member. And part of what we bring to an experience through our own lived lenses is that we all have gaps. And so part of the other thing that I wanted to acknowledge is just that we are all kind of in a continuum of learning in different aspects of identity. I'll give you an example of this that I know that has been really present for me in my life that I remember a lot from when I worked at Lane, which is that I am not a parent. I don't understand what student parents go through. I also know that there are some very unique needs that student parents have, and I had to work a little harder to figure that out and to ask those kinds of questions, because it was not a knee jerk, like I've been there, I know what this is, when a question came up that was about impacting student parents. It was just a gap in my lived experience, and it's something that I have to sort of dig in a little bit further and ask some questions about. That doesn't mean that I think that the needs of student parents are any less important. It just means that I had to work a little bit harder at it. And I'm sure that you all have experienced that too. There are places where you might have to work a little harder to understand what the experience and what the impact will be on specific communities of which you may not have been a part of before. Okay, let's go into the equity lens questions. So we'll just go through the equity lens questions together, and then I have an exercise that I'm hoping that we can talk through a little bit. The LCC equity lens is made up of 6 questions. And we saw that most equity lenses are usually 4 or 5 questions. We're overachievers, so we felt like there needed to be a 6th question. There weren't enough questions. And so that sort of addressed some of the feedback that we received during this process. So the first question is, who are the groups affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision, and what are the potential impacts on these groups? So this is really who is affected, and these groups will be different depending on what is the question that you're asking. There was a process sheet that I created a while ago. I don't know if it's still in use, but it had on the back of the equity lens questions, there was a list of different types of groups that might be impacted in a particular question. And it was just sort of an effort to sort of get your mind thinking a little bit about how we think about who might be impacted. So in many cases, decisions that come before you are going to be either students or employees. And so thinking about individual groups within those students and employees, student parents, for example, students who are rural, students who are experiencing housing insecurity or food insecurity, things like that, they might be impacted in different ways depending on what the issue is before you. So just sort of be thinking through what those could be. Number 2 is, does this policy, program, practice, or decision ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences? So this is really a question, does this make things worse for anybody? And that doesn't necessarily mean that it is the wrong decision, so it's not where you stop, but it is something that you really want to acknowledge and think about. Number 3 is, how have you intentionally involved stakeholders who are also members of the communities affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision in the decision-making process? And this one was a question that we got a lot of feedback about. And in part, that's because Lane, like many institutions, is sort of a complex, big organization where there's a lot of things happening at once. And there were times that folks identified where they felt like they had been invited to provide feedback, but their feedback was not actually wanted. So I think that we've all been sort of in positions like that, where there was a question about, please tell me what you think about this. But folks had an impression that decisions had already been made. And so this was really an effort to sort of stop a process and think about, have stakeholders intentionally been affected? And have we invited people to the table to share their experiences and their thoughts?
Oh, just really quick, the list that she was discussing is actually in our board packets. It's on page 2 in the board docs, and the handout is on page 2. So
Great.
excellent.
Number 4 is, what are the barriers to more equitable outcomes around this policy, program, practice, or decision? This is a place for us to acknowledge what kind of barriers might exist. This is where you might acknowledge, for example, constrained resources. So we don't have enough labor to do this. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough money. Or there is a law about this, or there is a compliance reason or regulation or some other reason why this has to be in this particular way. And so we might have a little bit of a challenge in making it a more equitable outcome. Number 5 is how will you mitigate the negative impacts and address the barriers identified above? So where we identify there might be potential negative impacts on any group, this is an opportunity for us to think about how will we mitigate those? How will we address them to make sure that they are lessened and lightened as much as possible? And then number 6, which is sort of our extra question, our bonus question on the LCC equity lens, is how can we create space for healing and reconciliation to transform our structures, environments, and selves? This really is ambitious as I'm reading through it again. The idea was, though, if our community might be damaged, or our relationships might be damaged by decisions that are made, how are we going to move forward from this and be stronger after this happens? How are we going to partner together and co-create something that is better than what we have right now? And so that is an ambitious question, but we thought it was important to ask, because if there is a way to do that, then that's the direction that we want to go in to really respect community. All right, so are we ready to run through an exercise? Okay.
Absolutely.
The exercise is, I'm going to give you a scenario here. There's a local corporate donor who's donated 100 high-speed wireless hotspots for use by students. They plan to show up on campus on Tuesday morning at the bus stop and hand them out. And they'd like your blessing in doing that. So how would you analyze this particular issue that comes before you? Let's go back to the first question of the equity lens. Who are the groups affected by this decision, and what are the potential impacts?
Individuals that may or may not have Wi-Fi at home.
Mhm.
Folks who may not be riding the bus.
On Tuesday morning too, right?
People that might have to deliver a child to childcare on Tuesday morning.
Sure.
Mm.
People who don't trust or understand hotspots and would rather talk to someone about accessing.
If there wasn't any staff or any individual that was monolingual, any monolingual students might not understand the resource that's available to them.
What about rural students, for example? If rural students are either maybe less likely to come to campus if they can manage to work or to do classes remotely, if that works better for them and is easier. We also know that our bus system, there's probably only a couple of buses coming from rural areas, right? And at certain times a day, they don't come as frequently. So it might be only specific times that students who live in rural areas might arrive.
Did they indicate if they would just hand it out to just students or just to employees or anybody like that?
It's a good question. That would be a
Exactly.
good question to ask.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's move on to the next question, but we can go back and address and add groups if we'd like to. Does this policy, program, practice, or decision ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences?
It produces unintended consequences because it leaves out and separates the groups that we just identified. So if you're not a bus rider on a Tuesday, you're kind of out of luck.
We don't know necessarily. We don't necessarily have all of the information we need. It might be that we're trying to target low income households, and it happens to be that low income households happen to be bus users. So that's why we decided to target that particular place. But it might also be that we're leaving out, special needs students that don't ride the bus themselves. So we need to know more about, the goals and the outcomes that we're trying to get to in order to determine whether it's a successful policy at achieving those goals and outcomes.
It might increase access for some students.
Going forward, would we approach things the same way? Like if someone else came and said, hey, I want to give out water bottles. Do we approach it the same way? All right, Tuesday morning. No, but like, yeah, but I'm like thinking of it like, kind of like future practices, if we're going to approach this differently next time, or are we looking to do something similar? Things like that.
It'd be nice to know more information about who is handing these wireless hotspots out.
Mhm.
What's the company? What are their values? What are their intentions? Are there strings attached? Are there expectations of something in return?
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't give you that information.
Yeah, it's free as long as you put your credit card info right here. Mhm.
Okay, let's move on to number 3. How have you intentionally involved stakeholders who are also members of the communities affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision process?
We don't know that any stakeholders have been involved. We don't know if their member, came from the chamber or as was mentioned, we don't know if there's intention, corporate intention. We don't know much.
If this was happened during a regular board meeting, we would have our student representative who would be here to essentially tell us that, oh, I think this is a good idea, or, oh, I don't think this will help the students, or things like that. So that's a benefit that we now have as a board. But yeah, there's opportunities though to invite more into that conversation of like, okay, should we proceed forward with the blessing to let this go through, or is there a better way that we can go about this? And should it only be students? Could it be potentially other people that are part of the Lane community?
Sometimes when you flood the marketplace, so to say, instead of doing things incrementally, you don't have a chance to hear or see what the ramifications of something are, because it's a one and done really fast.
And because I didn't give you a lot of information, you don't know for sure, right? If this is sort of like, we need to do this right now, or else the deal's off the table, or, you would have more information or be able to ask those questions, hopefully, if this were a real scenario. Your comments about the student perspective or thinking about how do we find out what students might actually need is a good one, because often in this position, you're placed in a position to make decisions on behalf of students, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we get information about what the student experience is or what would be most useful to students from a lot of different places. And so thinking about the variety of places you could get that information, or where you might inquire a little bit deeper, good things for you all to think about too. What might the barriers be to more equitable outcomes around this decision?
Quantity.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
The comment about technology and understanding technology could be a barrier, right? You might give somebody something that they don't have any idea how to use, and it's not really helpful to them at all, or that they don't need because they already have some other way to access Wi-Fi in a really reliable way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we kind of pointed out already, the distribution dynamics are a barrier in and of itself. So
Not, I think it's a barrier not to involve trusted places and people, like your counselors, just as an example. So if a lot of students are going to counselors asking questions about how to access all kinds of things, and they don't know anything about what's going on, it's a real missed opportunity.
So moving on to question 5, then, how will you mitigate the negative impacts and address the barriers that we've identified?
Talk with students.
Learn how the project design was decided upon, what the decision-making process was that led to that point, who was involved and who was not involved.
I think there's often value to pump the brakes. I mean, if there's, when does the decision have to be made? Does it have to be made?
Right? Is there more time? Can we do this more thoughtfully?
Is a part of that question is how would we support that work as a board?
Yes, or if I change the scenario a little bit and say, this donor says, look, it's Tuesday morning or nothing. I'm not gonna, that's it, right? At that point, you know that it may not be, that there may be students who miss out. There might be students who receive it who don't necessarily need it, or other folks who receive it who don't necessarily need it. So the question is, if you know that that is going to be an outcome, a possible outcome, how might you mitigate any of those negative impacts on different groups?
Gotcha.
So you might think, are there other opportunities? Could we ask this donor if they would be willing to donate or provide additional minutes at a low cost for students who need them? Once we can identify who those students might be, something like that.
Gotcha. Or maybe, hey, how can we work with you and our foundation to to maybe match, like, so it's not just 100, it's 200, and maybe we can, and it's so like and developing partnerships in that way with our connections as a board, essentially, to create a more, I want to choose my words, a better, a better dynamic of how we get the computers out to students. So, yeah.
So Deborah, we have limited information. I get all that, but let's just assume for a minute, like, hey, it's 100. That's it. Do you want them or not? And maybe we can push it to Thursday, but we're not taking a month or two on this, and we've got other business to do. At some point, right? We would have this decision, like, hey, we can make the lives of 100 people better, but almost certainly there was way more than that who would have benefited, who are just simply not going to get one of these because of the limitation. And so I'm just wondering how, what you have to say about that as, as our resident expert, like that's right. That issue is going to be there. Right. And I'm just curious how, what you counsel you would give us.
Well, I can tell you how I might approach it. I don't know if I would call myself an equity expert here, but I would say that the other kind of equity question that might be in the background here. So there is this one issue that's before you and wanting to maximize the positive impact of this one thing. While you're talking about this one thing, you all have very limited time and resources together too, right? And a lot of decisions and a lot of information that comes before you. So is this where you want to spend your time and your energy? That wasn't really intended to be part of the activity, but I think that sort of hopefully answers your question, Steve, that it might be that this is not where we want to put all of our focus right now, or maybe like this could have a positive impact on some people based on the way that it's going to be moved forward. And we don't think it's going to be a significantly negative impact on very many people. So it's worth pushing forward and just saying, let's just do it and not continue to kind of talk through it and talk through it and talk through it.
Why couldn't it be a checkout system, just like students check out computers and things like that?
Yeah.
That's another possible way to mitigate negative outcome. The comment that you made about technology too, and maybe not understanding technology, could we provide some type of assistance in understanding it, or instructions, or clinic or something like that to help. So there are things that you do like that. Yeah. definitely.
As a board chair, there's like, when I think of mitigate, I also think of like, what's the preemptive side of things, you know, because I feel like if I bring to a board, or if I'm a part of a board that has either this or not, it's like a binary choice, right? Then that is something that should be mitigated, and meaning that we should provide a board multiple choices of like potential avenues that we can take. So there's also parts of me that's like, how to mitigate this. I wouldn't want to have the board only have one choice or not. You know, I would want them to have multiple choices in this situation. So before this even came up, whether myself or any board chair have knowledge of this, that they develop essentially other choices and options that the board can have ahead of time, so that it's not just this presentation to the board's like Tuesday, 100 computers, bust up. Yeah, exactly. Right. You know, so it's like, okay, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So because of binary choice as opposed
And
to.
that certainly might be ideal. Another thing to think about though is, have you also asked for 5 or 6 other things that you want to make sure are sort of prepared for you to be able to consider and have all the information in advance? And is there an impact on staff, for example, like to be able to do that? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. It sort of depends on what the situation is, but that would be something to consider.
Yeah.
And then looking at the last question, how can we create space for healing and reconciliation to transform our structures, environments, and selves? This is obviously a sort of a discrete issue, and so you might not have a lot to address in this question. But let's say that the same thing happened last year, and I happen to have been a student who shows up for class on Tuesday at noon, and I didn't get a hotspot last year, and I really could have used one. And now I hear that you're going to do it again, and I don't think that's very cool. So how might we address the fact that there might be people who have already been harmed, or who might already kind of have feelings about or be impacted by decisions that have already been made? Is there any way for us to maximize the way that we're making this decision right now to create a better outcome moving forward?
So, sort of trying to be proactive. After the distribution took place, maybe some kind of a discussion with students about how could we have done this better?
Well, it sounds to me like we're not doing it. We're allowing some other organization to do it. You know, from my perspective, like the best thing would be, would you donate those to us? And we have all kinds of organizations and units on campus that distribute, you know, limited resources to folks in need. We know how to do this. We have lots of ways to reach folks in need. And I mean, that's our ultimate decision, I think, is like, are we going to try to take the responsibility of distributing them, or let this other organization do it in whatever way that makes sense to them and sanction it, you know? And if we let them do it on our property, no matter what, it'll be perceived as LCC having done it.
Yeah. And if I ran into that student, I would tell them that the STEP program that is offered allows you to get, internet access and stuff like that. But I mean, like offering that, is that really reconciliation? And is that healing to be like, oh, you weren't able to get this, but here's another thing. Let's get you connected to that. Is that really reconciliation?
I think this particular example, I think is a little bit tougher to kind of figure out what that might look like. In this case, I was just trying to sort of come up with some possible way to introduce someone who might have been harmed by a previous process that was similar. But I'm sure that you can imagine, especially when you're making decisions that have higher stakes, that are about people and about structures that support people, that there could be a significant impact where somebody says, look, last year, I thought this was going to happen, or I thought I was going to get this and I didn't get this, and I'm hanging in here. And now you're telling me again, it's not going to happen. And I feel like my trust has been harmed here. So that the answer is, the reason why this is complicated is the answer may not be, okay, you've hung in there since last year, we're going to do this for you. That might not be the right answer. it could be the right answer. That's up to you. But the right answer might be, I'm sorry, this is the decision, and I can see that this is going to harm you, or this is going to be a challenge. How can we think about how to move forward in a way that is going to be positive or provide you the support that you need? And it's a tough question, and there might not be a way to do that in a good way. The idea is to always have it in the back of your head that if there is a way to build relationship, making decisions and moving forward, even if they're decisions that impact people negatively, that is likely to yield a more equitable outcome over time as we continue to make decisions like that.
But we know shootings have occurred because that wasn't a viable answer, for a particular person who felt there wasn't, a solution, right? And so that can build up a lot of anger and it can result in violence.
No, I'm not positive that I understand what you mean. Could you explain?
Well, I'm just saying that, trying to explain to someone, yes, you are right. I acknowledge that this negatively affected you and I'm so sorry. And you need to, I'm listening to you and I want to show you that I care, doesn't always get it for some people. And in fact, it goes violent as their response. And you can't always, know that. Thank goodness that's a very minor reaction, but there's no doubt that that happens.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're making a decision that has to do with safety, with personal safety, then I think you might need to make a decision a different way, sort of depending on what things look like for you. But I hear what you're saying. It can raise a lot of really complicated feelings and really escalate things for sure when you don't make a decision that people feel good about.
But it seems in a situation like this, as described, where student's been aggrieved in the past, you might not be able to fix that particular student's issue, but at least you can listen, hear what the problems and where the barriers were, such that when this issue comes up again, you can navigate it better and hopefully have a better decision-making process the next time around.
Yeah.
I thought your point about not dropping everything else that you're doing to focus on the new decision is an important one. Like not letting the tail wag the dog, so to speak, or being distracted by, say, a donation that could take you off of your core mission.
What I like about this question, so there's two versions of this question. Obviously, the equity lens that's on the presentation, but there's also the equity lens in this document here. And what I like about how the question is asked in the document here is, how can we, as members of community college, create an environment and culture that fosters healing and reconciliation to transform our structures, environment, and selves? So there's pre-work to this question as well as work to be done in the moment, and I feel like there's that important element of we need to create a process, for situations like this ahead of time so that we can, essentially be able to make a decision using equity lens so that the culture and the concept and the past practices, and I use the word dynamics a lot, dynamics that allow for us to more effectively respond to a situation like this. So, yeah.
Deborah, if you were on this board, how would you respond to this situation?
Oh, wow. Way to turn the question around.
I have to say, I don't know the answer to that for sure, but I came up with this issue or this scenario because I was really thinking about something that did happen when I worked at Lane Community College during the pandemic, where we were in a position where we had to make a lot of decisions very quickly without as much information or resources or knowledge that we would have liked to have. And there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a student, and I'm guessing that some of you probably remember this. There was a student who was frustrated because he said that he needed a place to do his homework. And we had closed the college because people were afraid to come to work. I mean, it was a very scary time. We'd closed the college and closed the computer labs, and the student didn't have a place to go, and he was really frustrated. And when a number of us heard that, I feel like I'm choking up right now. I was just like, immediately had this like gut reaction, like we must open everything, right? We must open the computer lab. We have to have this open. This is part of our mission. We have to do it. And there were people on campus who had a very strong reaction and went to heroic efforts really to make sure that we had computer labs that were open and that students were being served, and that we created this space for students to be able to work, because it felt like we immediately know what is absolutely the right thing to do in this situation. I think that there were only a few students who used that computer lab during the entire time. And we had these employees who were coming in wearing masks. It was early in the pandemic. We were really uncertain about what was happening. They were, putting themselves at physical risks, saying, I want to be here for the students. I want to make sure that this is open. I've wondered often whether that was the right decision or not. And so it's something that's sort of like stuck with me. It might have been the right decision. I don't know. But I think there are times when we feel like we know exactly what's right, or it feels like here is something that is very clear. And then afterwards, we have to sort of think about it and think, was that my gut reaction based on my own experience and my feelings about, hearing that at that time? Or did I really think through what the impact might be on all of the people who were involved in that process? There wasn't a negative outcome necessarily of that particular decision, except that a lot of people went to a lot of work, and I don't know that there was anything else really negative that happened from that. But it's one thing that's just made me think really carefully about even decisions that feel like it feels very obvious are not totally obvious. I think we only have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to make, yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to give you all some time to just think as a board together about whether you would like to have a way, or whether you hope to kind of use the equity lens, how you might hope to use it. So there are a couple of options I'm just going to sort of throw out there. One is that, I still use an equity lens in a lot of my own decision making. I just do it on my own. I don't necessarily talk to anybody about it. I have something that I call an equity deck, and I'll share one with each of you. It's just a little deck of paper on a ring where I write down categories of people who I just want to make sure that I'm really thinking about when I make a decision that might impact. And you could work on, making that for yourself, and you can do it on an independent basis. You also might think about whether you want to have equity conversations together. Also, I just want to acknowledge this is a public forum and it's a little uncomfortable sometimes. So thinking through whether that is something that you might want to do. I recall a few years ago, there was a request that when the board was considering policies, I think that I was on a role of sort of flagging potential equity questions that were just sort of, pre-marking things that were going to come before the board, just so that people would have an idea of where they might want to spend a little bit more time thinking about it, or consider the power privilege dynamics that might be at work during those things. So those are the kinds of things that you might consider if you wanted to do something like that as a board. Or you might just decide to say, this is something I keep in my head and will be helpful to me, but we don't need to do anything as an agreement between us in our decision-making.
How about Mike?
It seems to me like it might be helpful if we could agree that, and I don't know what the right way to do this would be, but to just have these questions maybe as an addendum to our board packet or something, so that we don't forget that we have this tool.
To kind of create a more structural kind of aspect to it.
Yeah, and to be inclined to, if I had it, I might be more inclined to look at it and walk through it than if I didn't have it in front of me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the exact way to do it, but some kind of a way. I remember at one point Marge passed out cards to remind us of some certain thing. It wasn't equity lens, but
I think those were your board agreements. I think they were on little paddles.
maybe that was it. Yeah. But just something that is kind of mechanical, but makes it easy for us to fall back on it, to refer to it.
Just to clarify, like, would you want that for every like board policy action that we're taking on, or just like something that's in our like kind of board packet? I
I'm
guess.
not prescribing that. I'm
Yeah.
just suggesting that
Mhm.
if these questions were in the packet, I
Yeah.
might be more inclined to refer to it.
Got it.
Or maybe just on a card at our place when we come to the meeting, on a laminated card.
Yeah, Zach.
I'll just suggest that maybe practice makes perfect, that
Mhm.
running through this exercise was very helpful. And so potentially, during our annual retreat or some other time, we might have one or more examples like this that we could walk through and just kind of have that practice as a board discussing some of these concepts so that when they arise in actuality, we have that experience and lens to work through.
Good to know. Excellent. Well, Deborah, I'll speak on myself as a board member. I remember when I first got onto the board and you being a part of our board discussions and so forth. And I mean, I still have that tiger card that you sent out to us during the year of the tiger, during the Lunar New Year and so forth. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate your work here at this community, at our college, and we're the community's college, and you're always welcome here. I think we said that as when you on that last board meeting that you were here, and I'm sorry, I'm trying not to tear up myself, to be honest. But I really appreciate the work. I really appreciate the perspective. And on behalf of the board, we greatly, greatly appreciate you giving us that history and your knowledge and your years of experience here at this college. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to think about these issues. I know they're complicated and there's no easy answers, and I don't envy the decisions that you all have to make. So thank you for making them.
Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you so much. All right, moving on to the diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah,
Dr. Walsh?
thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Fulnegi. And thanks a lot, Deborah. We really appreciate your time. Really appreciate that. I want to introduce this presentation that Shane is going to do with just a few words before we start. I would like for the board and the college to know a few things about diversity, equity, inclusion, so that I, as your president, want Lane to be a place where everyone feels welcome and thrives. I mean, everyone at the college. I understand, however, that there may be instances where there may be issues that impede people of diverse backgrounds to feel welcome and thrive here at Lane. Just to be clear, I view diversity in multiple ways, in a broad sense, and it includes things like socioeconomic background, diversity of thought, racial, ethnic, cultural, gender and religious diversity, and geographic diversity. I want everyone here at Lane to thrive. That's my goal. I had a meeting on Monday of this week with members of the governance councils. Since then, I have really struggled with the messages that were shared in that meeting. It was very painful to me. I left that meeting thinking that some in our college still doubt my commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, perhaps there's a communication breakdown or confusion, but I want to take this moment to affirm my commitment. Of course, I'm an African-American woman, so of course I support diversity and fairness to all and helping all people feel like they belong. In my leadership, I've never strayed from my commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or to wanting to provide this institution the kind of leadership acumen that can help the college fulfill the goals of the current strategic plan and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been thinking a lot about a chief diversity officer role and considering questions like this, like what would be the best role for this position? What are the challenges faced by other chief diversity officers? Why do they succeed or fail? And most importantly, how the job can be structured to have significant impact across the institution. I've been thinking a lot about how to develop the college, how the college can develop leadership acumen, how diversity, equity, and inclusion can be embedded and actualized in every area of the college and not siloed, how we can truly embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion as everyone's responsibility, what it looks like, how we might get to the point of creating an environment where everyone belongs. I think it's critical for the board and the college to know and to not have any doubt that I am not sidestepping the matter and also where I am now. My intention is to have a chief diversity officer role at Lane. So this might be the moment to share some of my ideal thoughts about the chief diversity officer role. First, the role would have significant responsibility to make an impact across the institution, would have skill in change management, would advance the leadership agenda of the college and sit on the cabinet, would provide strategic direction and action to align the strategic plan with achieving results and impact the improvement of the college's culture. I want to hear from the institution. I want to hear from the college. And so next week, I'll be communicating an opportunity for the college to give me their thoughts on the hopes and dreams that I just outlined for a chief diversity officer role. I want this input and will collect it through June 10th with the goal of posting a position in the fall. We are still on track to have a comprehensive path forward for diversity, equity, and inclusion that can be communicated to the college in the next academic year with a rollout plan by fall of 2025, as I stated in the February 27, 2024 President's Corner of the Lane Weekly. And now with that, thank you for listening. I'll turn the time over to Shane Turner to present an update on how Lane has continued to provide support for diversity, equity, and inclusion after the retirement of a longtime AVP of equity and inclusion. Shane.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you about the way that we've carried on the work of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office when that position became vacant. Brett, if you could go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that HR took over when that office vacated was the cultural competency professional development. And there are two components to that. One is the tracking of the data, because all employees, as you know, are required to complete 12 hours of cultural competency training over the preceding 3 years. And we have to track that. In the handoff, we had an opportunity to streamline the way that we manage that data. It was being managed in a spreadsheet, if you can believe, and then upload it into Banner. And so a member of my staff has been working to bring that technology up to date, putting it into smart sheets and working with IT to improve the way that the balances will be reported on Banner for people to see. The piece that wasn't in place was a visibility for managers to be able to see how their people are doing. How is our compliance, right? Because one of the things that has been missing along the way is some accountability around actually completing this. And so IT is also working on a Power BI dashboard to provide real-time reporting for people in supervisory roles so that they can follow up and make sure that their staff are actually completing the training that's been assigned. Next slide.
Just to clarify, their training, but also staff's training?
Sorry, all employees.
All employees.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Employees.
Appreciate it.
Sure. So another function that was held in that office was funding of cultural competency professional development. And while we've been we don't have a lot of budget, but we try to put that budget where it can have the biggest impact. And so one of the places that has impact is when we have training that occurs during either spring conference or fall in-service. And so we're partnering with some other areas on campus to bring in Dana Johnson and Dr. Khalid White during spring conference to talk to us about LGBTQ issues, and they're here for 2 days actually. So they're working the first day with students and the second day with employees, and so we're really getting a lot of bang for the buck out of that. We've also got expanded training offerings through Vector Solutions. They bought out another company that had a full training catalog. And so that has been expanded over the course of this year going into next as well. Next slide. Bias response team. I think, have heard about that and requests for updates on that. The procedure as it was written before was a pilot. And so part of the requirement in that procedure that was approved was to go back to Diversity Council after a year and make revisions to it. And part of what we found was when all of that responsibility is held in one seat, one position, when there's turnover, there's not continuity. And so part of what has been done, and I appreciate Daniel Brown, our Title IX coordinator, he's led the work on this with the Diversity Council in identifying specific roles on campus that are sort of sitting roles on the bias response team so that if any of one of those turns over, there's continuity to continue the work forward. There's also designated training so that in order to serve in these roles that are really highly sensitive and require a lot of trust, that people be adequately trained in a defined way to be qualified to participate on that committee. Daniel is continuing to market and push awareness because he already goes out to departments to talk about Title IX. So it's sort of a natural thing for him to pick up in this time as well. Next slide.
Yes, good.
Sure.
So in those roles, are they, so sometimes when we sit on a council or something like that, it's known to be a 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year position, so to say. Is that how long, like?
These are permanent roles by position. So for instance, our associate dean in charge of the Center for Accessible Resources, our director of student conduct, our Title IX coordinator, all defined roles that serve as a standing position on the bias response team. Other people who are interested can become a part of that as well, just have to go through the required training.
And so other people who are interested and go through the training would usually participate in that role for 1 year, 2 years?
As long as they want.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
There'd be a requirement for refresher training so that they stay current. Recruitment and retention. I wanted to just talk about the other things that we're doing in HR to reduce bias. I've talked a little bit about these in the affirmative action report, but we're in the process of implementing blinded applications so that it would redact specific information in employee applications or applicant applications. Say that twice, so that you're not bringing bias to the process of selection, right? So that's going to be finished this month. I think we're going to wrap that up and be able to roll that out. We've broadened the inclusivity of minimum qualifications. That includes allowing somebody to have a master's degree, meet the minimum qualifications by the time of start. So let's say I'm in grad school right now, I'm applying for a teaching position. I don't have my degree conferred yet. If I have it in time for me to start, then I meet the minimum quals, right? Expansion of the search advocate program and assignment to full-time searches. All of our full-time faculty searches right now have search advocates assigned because we've been able to expand the group of people who are participating in that program as search advocates. So that's exciting. And then broader review of applicant pools prior to screening and making the call whether or not the pool is sufficiently diverse and whether we need to extend the search to get more applicants. We just did that with one of our faculty searches this spring. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we've had an increase in diversity of our employee groups from 6.8 to 12.6%. And that's in the environment of an 8.3% averaged year-over-year turnover, which is super, super low, less than half of the national average. You know, when I don't know if you remember the great outmigration at other places where people were resigning, going to other places. It didn't happen here, even through the pandemic. And when you look at faculty turnover, we had 15 people take the separation incentive. I know you heard about that in the association report last meeting. Well, 5 of those folks are not leaving until next December, actually. So actually, only 2/3 of those that are leaving right now. So our faculty turnover this year is 5.5%. So a little over a third of what the national average has been. And I know I mentioned turnover for two reasons. One, because it's hard to make dramatic changes in the composition of our employees if the employees are staying, the current employees are staying, right? Because we're not growing as an employee base. We're kind of replacing or reconfiguring the positions that we have. The other thing that I think it's important to remember about this turnover number is that you hear a lot, people come and say a lot of things to you about working here. And people say things for different reasons, but they vote with their feet and they're staying here. So as we're going through the Gallup Culture Survey, we'll have the responses to tell you, but the turnover tells you that it's a good place to work, that people want to be here. The last thing I'd add is that managers and faculty are more diverse than they've been in the last 10 years, and honestly, probably ever. We probably weren't more diverse 10 years ago than we are now. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind and in context. Can we do better? Yes, we are doing better, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. Yeah.
A quick question, and this is a question both for the requirements and the bias response procedural updates. Did that go through like a shared governance process when they were when those procedural updates and or these recruitment and retention, or sorry, the minimum qualifications and so forth?
Yeah, so I'll start with the bias response. Yeah, we work directly with Diversity Council to make modifications. So that's part of the governance process and was actually in the policy requiring that. The revision of the minimum qualifications didn't come through governance. It came through the campus climate work groups from last time. So campus-wide participation across the campus in those work groups. And that's where those recommendations came from.
Gotcha.
Next slide. So the Officer of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, as Dr. Bulger mentioned, that position is vacant and plans to refill it. It was, Greg was in that position since 2017. We're wanting to align the position structure and portfolio with best practices and make sure that it's set up for success. We're going to be getting input and be on track to present a comprehensive plan for DEI at the college by fall 2025. Next slide. I just wanted to mention this. The complaints of discrimination that are alluded to in written communication to you, I think, and in the unfair labor practice that's been filed by LCCEA, it's really important to say that those complaints of discrimination were investigated and determined that there were no findings of discrimination. Now, some of those complaints have been incorporated into the LCC ULP complaint. They've added retaliation complaints on top of that. But it's really important to also remember that those complaints have not been adjudicated yet. So we have a hearing in May, and then there'll be a determination. But the college has defenses to those claims, and we intend to assert them. So I want to make that clear. Next slide, please. Yes, Denise.
Okay, so we will get the results of the hearing.
Yes, yes, of course.
And so this Chief Diversity Officer for fall of 25.
So yeah,
seems-
the DEI plan will be fall of 25. I would anticipate, based upon the timeline that Dr. Bulger mentioned, we would probably have someone starting January of 25, and then would be developing a plan presented to campus in the next academic year.
And how was that timeline determined? I mean, in other words, why isn't it sooner than that?
Why is what not sooner than that?
The position being filled.
Oh, well, I tried to explain that I've been thinking about lots of things related to this position. In my view, it's not something that has to be done lightly. There are lots of articles, lots of research. I'd be happy to share some of that with you about these positions not succeeding. And I didn't want to have a position filled right away without considering what the college needs. This is the end of my second year here, what the college needs, and putting really this position in the best possible place for it to be successful. In addition to that, and I'll share with you what I said tonight too. In addition to that, I really want this institution to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the spirit of what your strategic plan has articulated. In the wisdom of this board and the college, the strategic plan has diversity, equity, inclusion throughout that plan. That means it's in facilities and human resources and teaching and learning and student affairs throughout the institution. Well, that could suggest perhaps some different strategies for how we infuse and embed diversity, equity, inclusion throughout our institution. So this is a great place to start. I wanted to make sure that Shane gave an update on where we are and what we're doing, the fact that there's continuity with respect to DEI since last September. But these paths forward cannot be taken lightly. If you do, you're going to get the same results that you've seen over the last several years, and we don't want that.
Next slide. Other questions?
So I'll follow up on a little bit of what Denise asked about. When we lost our previous leader of the Office of Diversity and Equity, why was the decision made to not fill it immediately? I guess, and why? So was at that time, had you decided this position wasn't needed at that point, and that's why it transitioned to HR, or it's just taken this long to determine what that position should look like for rehiring?
So yes, these things do take time. We wanted to make sure, I certainly wanted to make sure that there was continuity in the responsibilities of that position. And that's what Shane in part is presenting this evening. And we can go over some of that again, if that would be helpful. The main areas where there was continuity was the cultural competency, there was bias incident reporting, and maybe there were a few others, but those two come to my mind. And so I'll just, say again that these decisions in my mind are not, can't be taken lightly. And I'll share some of the articles with you that I've been reading, because some of these positions really aren't successful, don't get you what you need. And so I took a look at the institution's strategic plan, looked at articles, my own experience, and I thought I'm gonna have to take some time to really think through this.
And we're a little over time, but we can make up for it later in the agenda. So yeah, just want to make sure that we're.
I'd just like to say that I'm persuaded that the DEI work of the college has not missed a beat. It's continued. I appreciate the report tonight, Shane, and I'm glad to know that work is continuing and that we're going to be advancing that work in a very thoughtful way in the future.
Denise?
Well, in using the equity lens, perhaps, or practicing it. So, excuse me, I'm just kind of trying to practice it. So I know we're going to hear the result of a hearing, but if anyone, I want to feel, I guess, and know that our colleagues at all different levels of the college, if they have come forward and feeling uncomfortable on whatever level or language that they're using, that we have a way to make that better, discuss it, process it, and understand, well, what language or what actions or what things would make it better? Because we certainly don't want to be an institution where people are not feeling welcome, safe, or any level of what that language might be. So I'm just wondering about maybe using that equity lens process there.
Sure.
Steve?
If I'm not mistaken, I think the Gallup poll would give us some kind of a baseline to Denise's question.
Yeah, it absolutely should. We'll see how we've progressed from the last time we surveyed 2 years ago. If the issues have gotten better, if there are different issues that we need to grapple with. It's intended to be iterative, so it gives us the roadmap.
Out of curiosity, especially on the recruitment side of things, is there any trainings for managers or hiring managers or people who participate in like interview panels? Is there trainings of essentially how they can look for opportunities for DEI in the recruitment side of things? Because we have a few positions open up right now, and I mean, in many of them, I see incredible opportunities for people of different community backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, and so forth can apply for those positions.
So it's part of the orientation that's done with search committees every single time. I'm really I'm gonna let it play out. I'm not going to jinx it by saying anything, but I'd really like to bring forward one of the searches that we have underway right now and have the dean of that area come and talk about what they did to achieve such an incredibly diverse pool. It's a model using active recruiting and they were all bought in. The faculty were involved in it. Everyone in the department was involved in achieving success. So we'll work on bringing it in.
All right. That would be great, actually. Steve?
I just wanted to, applaud you all for including and expanding search advocates. That we have a similar thing at the University of Oregon. I happen to have been sitting on a bunch of search committees lately, and my experience there, and I'm sure it's similar here, is they add a lot, right? There's a lot of things that can be done that the average person sitting on a committee is not going to be aware of in terms of knowing where to promote the position, but the search advocate will know those things and how to check certain biases at the door. And my experience in the last handful of these things that I've done is the search advocate, creates a lot of, opportunity and potential where it wasn't before. So good on you for doing that.
That's great. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. And with that, we're about 5 minutes over, but I think we have some opportunities to make up for it later in the agenda. D and E are really similar, so we'll probably combine those two. So yeah. Next is mandatory and student fee discussion. Dr.
Yeah.
Walter?
Thank you. Well, we have this discussion that we promised you at the last meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to John, and I think he's got a team of people who are going to assist with this one. John?
Indeed. Yes. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We do. This is one of the final components for the FY25 budget planning process. We have a number of fees that want to review with you. And again, these are discussion items. And this will be a team effort here this evening. So let's go to the next slide. Essentially, we want to talk about a few fees that we're proposing to change and then a few that are not. This is separate, of course, from course fees, differential fees, and other things related that the college and faculty deans review and propose adjustments to at a different time. But we want to talk about the credit enrollment fee, technology fee, student activity fee, and have a discussion about the student health fee and a number of options that have been reviewed by stakeholders on campus. Fees that we're not proposing any change to are the transportation fee, the online course, and the photo ID and bus pass fees. So next slide. So as a brief summary, and there is one here, by the way, that was added afterwards that we'll have some discussion on. There is a slide later to encapsulate the explanation of what it is, which is the mandatory application fee. So we're going to start the summary of this. The student enrollment one-time fee it's currently been $30, proposing moving to $31. Tech fee has been $13 per credit hour, proposing a move to $14. Student activity fee reduced from $63.12 to $62.57, and we'd like to discuss again the options of what's been discussed for the student health fee. So on the next slide, again, it's a team effort here. So I'd like to turn it over to Don Whiting.
Good evening, everyone. So the one-time credit enrollment fee, like John said, is a $30 one-time fee. It is assessed to all credit students who are enrolling in credit classes. They pay it one time. And the fee has gone towards helping to fund our placement testing, which is now just placement, can involve testing, but doesn't always. And then really the majority of the fee goes to help support our degree and certificate application process, as well as diplomas and postage and the process that supports getting those diplomas out to students. That's what we do, right? We award degrees and then we send them diplomas, and it's their reward for completing a certificate. So we first assessed this fee in 2006. It's never been increased since that time. What we know is that rates for postage and printing have gone up. And so that has hit our department. And so we're asking for a modest increase to support continuing to fund our diplomas and our postage and the processes that we currently have in place for that.
Are the diplomas made in-house through the, Yep,
They are. And our staff actually stuffs envelopes and puts postage on. So everything is done by our team here at LCC.
thank you, print shop. Go ahead.
So we are proposing a $1 increase to the technology fee. We recently learned that we are adopting responsibility for a software package that touches most of our students, a lot of our faculty and staff. And the annual cost right now is $185,000. Previously, this was funded by a grant, but the grant expires this year. So the obligation for us to pick it up within IT would start this fall. The $1 increase would cover almost exactly what we were looking at in the increase. The last time the tech fee was increased, I believe, was 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a $2 increase. I haven't seen any documentation on the history of why that happened then. There's probably several reasons with the enrollment changes in COVID, but the impacts we anticipate, this would fund the software and allow our faculty and staff to maintain the student support level that they currently provide, keeping that tool available. And the grant, while it's funded to this year, but not, if I understand correctly, they're not eligible to apply for it for a 2-year window. But that would free, IT picking up the cost would free up that grant application for them to explore other innovation efforts with those dollars should they receive the grant in the future.
Questions? Nope. All right.
Carl was supposed to be here, but he's actually meeting with the Student Activity Fee Committee about this very thing. I'll talk to this slide. The Student Activity Fee Committee consists of a group of students who review the current student fees for identity groups, unions, clubs, and each one of those clubs will bring up their requirements, their requests, their finances each year to the Student Activity Fee Committee. If you look at the 2023-24 column, you'll see that it has the how much the students were charged for each of those different areas in that year, totaling in $63.12 at the bottom. And the recommendation for 24-25 brought by all the different groups, you can see the differences, the recommendation column. It's $62.57. It's actually less by 0.87% than last year. Some clubs have asked for more, some have asked for less. We do have the meeting that's going on right now is actually due to an appeal. If you recall, at the last board meeting, we had, I believe it was Kendra from she's the advisor for the neurodiversity student union and newly formed union.
Mhm.
They were given, if you look there, 50 cents as a new union, the first time they've received any monies. But they appealed, and so tonight they're meeting and they're asking for more than that. So the student activity fee committee is looking at, so if NDSU gets $1 a student per term, it'll be $63.07, which is a 0.08% decrease in the overall freight fee. So it's pretty much even then. But if they get $1.25 student per term, the activity fee will be $63.32, which is a 0.32 increase in the overall fee from last year. I've been getting texts. They're still talking through this right now. So that might be one small change to this slide.
Gotcha. So the request is $1.25?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
And the students will make that decision, and then we'll hear more. And I think if there's a second appeal, it goes to President Bolger, and then we go from there.
Got it.
I have do all students have to pay student activity fees? So for example, rural students, if they're enrolled and are not on main campus and don't have any of these activities, how does that work?
Yes, I think all students do pay the student activity fee.
So there's no process to appeal that? I mean, if you're not participating in any thing or don't have access, let's just say.
Say, for instance, let's just say the Black Student Union. You might have students who are rural. They have meetings and they can join online and still access those support groups and things like that. So online students are rural. Okay.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
All credit-based campus students. So if you're taking a class on campus, then you're charged the fee.
Credit-based.
But if you're strictly online, then the fee is not assessed.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the same for the Florence campus?
It's for students who are taking certain courses in certain modalities or locations.
Okay.
So credit students on the main campus, was that right?
Yeah, the
And-
way that the system is it, yeah, it's credit students on the main campus.
On the main campus,
Yeah.
gotcha. Paid for.
Thank you, Dawn.
This is me. Okay.
Well,
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I had Mike in the queue. I apologize about that.
Of the makeup of the fee committee again,
There
not names, but just who's represented.
are 7 students on the Student
Thank you.
Activity Fee Committee. And Becca, our new director of Student Success, works with them, and so does Carl Ye, our Dean of Students.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Steve?
Just a quick question. Were there any clubs that were dropped that aren't shown here at all?
I don't believe so this time. I believe the last time around or the time before, I think Osberg was dropped from this, and that was,
Yeah.
but not this time.
Sorry, no need to add too much on here. So, and I should know more about this. So the Longhouse and the NASA student fees. So that goes towards, does that go towards the maintenance of the Longhouse and the basic operation or the stewardship of the Longhouse?
Stewardship and the operation of it.
And the operation of it. Excellent. And then the NASA one is just purely for the NASA student activities, supportive services and so forth.
Yes, and in fact, the majority of the funds they receive go to put on that powwow that happened this week.
Understood. Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go back one. Okay, great. In your package, there were a number of background documents for your review that provide context about the health clinic fee. I will highlight some of this information in order to ground our discussion tonight. As of today, students who attend in-person and hybrid 4-credit courses are required to pay $45 per term, and this allows them to use the health clinic. Online students are exempt, the reason being they aren't on campus, but they may opt in. As our enrollment has shifted towards greater numbers of online offerings, there have been fewer students paying the fee, and this has in part contributed to a deficit. As you may be aware, LCC is the only Oregon community college to have a health clinic. It was founded in the 1970s, and over the years, the fee structure has not kept pace with costs. In response to this challenge, President Bulger charged a task force, which included representatives from various stakeholders. This included administrators, union representatives, all of the health clinic employees, our IR director, and student government representatives to assess the situation and to make recommendations. While an initial report was completed in June of 2023, the task force members observed that it would be beneficial to have more time to gather student perspectives on clinic usage and fee structures. The task force has recently updated its recommendations from June, and my colleague, Vice President of Student Affairs, Colin Joyce, will provide highlights of student feedback, an overview of the recommendations made and their potential impact, and general themes that have emerged in our discussions.
I want to start by saying the health clinic staff and faculty have and continue to provide quality healthcare and service. I'm providing this information to you tonight in order to get your feedback prior to the administration making a final recommendation here. The second reconvening of the health clinic task force in fall and winter of 23-24 made 5 recommendations for the future funding of the health clinic. And the group that there was a first group that met last spring, and then there was this the group reconvened. There were 19 people in all from IR, student affairs. There were health clinic employees, classified and union and faculty union representatives. And student participation in this group dropped. Student government wasn't represented in the same way it was in the previous. We kind of had a bit of a change in student government at that time. And during these meetings, what we did as well, in fall of 23, we did put out that big survey that went to students, and we were able to utilize that survey to get student feedback. And during these meetings, the task force reviewed student survey data. There were a lot of questions asked in that survey. 12% of the students, which is actually a fairly good amount, filled out that survey as far as the healthcare questions were concerned. Here are a few highlights from the student surveys that went out. The full survey results are available in the board docs packets. 70% of LCC students are aware that we have a healthcare clinic on campus. 77% of the respondents said that they have access to a healthcare provider other than the LCC healthcare clinic. There are heavy use amongst international students. 87% of the respondents said that access to healthcare on campus is important. Demographically, there's not a statistically significant difference between student usage by BIPOC, Latinx, or Caucasian students. However, female on-campus students are more likely to use a clinic than male on-campus students. So on this slide here, what you'll see is the different groups. I'm just going to turn up my page here. These are the recommendations that were made by the task force. We had on the left, you'll see the 5 different recommendations. The first recommendation is $55 in person for hybrid, for in-person and hybrid credit students, $25 for online only credit students, and $200,000 to come from the general fund. And if you'll see there, that was the first choice for the majority of the majority of the task force members. You'll see where it says first choice next to it. You'll see 9 and then 1, 1, 3, 5. That's the number of task force members that voted in that extra column, just to explain that. You'll see there the second most popular was the bottom one, $60 in person for in-person and hybrid credit students, and $0 for online only credit students, with the option of opting in at $60, with $270,000 coming from the general fund. The others were, third place was $50 for in-person and so on. So they were much less represented in the voting. So those two were the significant ones. If you want to go to the next slide, there's a much easier way of viewing this. You can see pretty clearly what the recommendations were of the task force on this one. So again, $55 for in-person and hybrid credit students, $25 online only credit students, and $200,000 from the general fund. And then the next one there, $60 for in-person and hybrid credit students, and 0% for online only credit students, and then significantly less votes on the rest. I'm going.
We got a question for Steve.
When you're ready. No.
Yeah, please ask a question as you go. Yeah.
Well, first I want to let Deborah know that I put the equity lens questions at the top of my stack here. So I'm thinking about those as we work our way through. If there was ever, a time, right, for the equity lens, it seems like it's right here and now. My question is, could you explain the rationale that the task force used to recommend anything other than $0 for the online only students?
We did look at, there was the option, we looked at telehealth and other options for online students. But when we looked into that and researched it more, it didn't seem feasible financially to do that. What other thoughts do you have?
That's something that we discussed considerably, and there were people who had very strong opinions that online students shouldn't be charged. I would say that. I would also say there were no students at this vote.
At the
correct?
last vote.
Yeah, at the last vote. But I don't know if you have more information that came directly from SBA.
Just my recollection, there was a recognition that you could be an online student sitting in the center building, taking your class, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're geographically separated from the campus. People.
Well, can that distinction?
Oh, sorry. Kevin, and then
Sorry.
go ahead, Kevin.
Well, actually, go ahead.
Okay.
Because my question is different.
Okay,
If I could just.
Well, I was just going to say if that distinction could be made, because in the rural communities, you're not an online student sitting in the center, and you're not coming to campus to access, the health clinic. So, I mean, maybe it is possible to separate out that definition or something, or I don't know.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, just going back to what you said about the response rate on the survey was, did I hear correctly, 12%?
Yes, for the full survey, 19% of our students filled it out, but by the time they got it, only 12% of those filled out the healthcare questions.
So 12% of 19%.
No, 12% of all students.
12% of all students.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That kind of catches my attention a little bit.
It's actually a good response rate.
Sad, but
It's a
true.
decent response rate. And I spoke with our institutional researcher about that, and she looked at it in terms of how representative it was, and it was representative. It was a little overrepresentative, I think, with white female students responded, but generally speaking, that's a decent response rate for a student survey.
Yeah, so as far as online students, face-to-face students, adult students, students BIPOC, and so on, it was very representative of our whole student body.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is not a census, however, but it's representative.
Mike?
So if it's not too onerous, I'm wondering if the board could be given a report that tells us what the level of support from the general fund has been year over year for maybe the last 10 years. I don't know if 200,000, I'd like that 200,000 in some sort of context.
What have we contributed before in the past? If you wouldn't mind coming up to the, appreciate it.
John.
Appreciate the hand, by the way. It was just like, boom.
You don't want me to just yell it from the.
Yeah.
Last year it was 450,000. The year before was 490,000. It's more than any other service that we support year over year.
Yeah.
Print shop, so on.
And
Thank you.
And does it, one last question, out of the general fund, which fund does it come out of?
General fund.
Just the standard general fund, doesn't come from any of the other,
No.
okay.
General fund to fund 9.
Gotcha. Comment that I have, it's coming from a rural area and so forth. But by the way, board members, how many of you have been inside of the health clinic? I would recommend that you go. I went today and saw them serving students, and they're incredible staff, incredible people, and everything like that. And I'll speak from my perspective, being in a rural area, because when the fires happened, my rural health clinic burnt down. I got my COVID shots here at the student health clinic because it was available to the community and so forth. And so I do want to state that students that are rural and online, that giving them access to this health clinic, especially with the fewer and fewer health options that we're seeing in our community. I mean, Eugene doesn't have a hospital right now, right? So I see a lot of benefits for if online students had access, automatically had a fee, which gave them access to it, that there would be that additional utilization of it, especially as we see fewer and fewer healthcare options throughout this time period. So speaking from someone from a rural area and have experienced situations where healthcare wasn't available in my community, even though I wasn't a student, the fact that this was available to me was really incredible. So, yeah.
Also being from a rural area, Florence, it's important to consider that we have kind of the opposite situation, because we do have an urgent care and a walk-in and a hospital. And so I think for students who have been only accessing online classes and do not come to campus, I think that gives us the opportunity maybe to make a distinction of what a definition or so of what we mean by online. And I don't know, I think, is it true that Cottage Grove recently opened up or is opening a health clinic? No.
The facility is not open yet.
It's not open yet.
No.
Okay.
So these are the ranking and the choices, but the costing of these different choices here. Option 1 gives us $988,584. Option 2 is $955,000. Option 3 is $983,000, and option 4 is $956,000. And there's no costing for the last option. Okay, Zach.
What did we allocate towards this in the tentative budget thus far?
Jonathan and Kara, John, do you have a sense of that at this point?
Again, the projections we previously saw, did that include any money for this?
So for next year, we've budgeted, if we don't make any changes, we've estimated about a $450,000 deficit for this year that we'll have to cover. That doesn't include the Fund 9 sub-fund reconciliation that we've talked about over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
But for the tentative numbers, so for this year, we're expecting a 400,000 deficit.
More or less.
That hopefully was included in the numbers we've seen previously.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then for next year,
another 450,000.
And was that in the numbers that we saw previously?
Yes.
So if we approved 200,000 from the general fund, it would actually be 200,000 less than our tentative budget had in it.
Well, the amount we approved for the Fund 9 reconciliation is for all of the sub-funds. So it's not just the health clinic. So it's broken down into different programmatic levels. The health clinic that we talked about is about $450,000 of that we've talked about.
So of the $1 million that is supposed to go to the Fund 9 to help replenish that fund, 200,000 of that is actually potentially 200 to 400,000 of that will actually get sucked up into this and not actually replenish the fund.
That is a way we could do it, yes.
Steve?
Just thinking about process a little bit, have you all ever considered having students weigh in, not just in a survey format, but in the way that students weigh in with the student fee that's being debated right now, and put this out to the equivalent of a ballot measure for students to weigh in on, or through the existing student fee process where student representatives ultimately make the recommendation, which we largely support. I don't think we get too terribly involved in that, instead of us making a decision on their behalf.
The Student Activity Fee Committee, I think that might not be a bad way to go. I would like to probably perhaps see a
I get that it couldn't
Yeah.
to do it now, so this might be a question for, we have to work our way through this time, but perhaps we set this on a different course on the long term, and these are tough questions for students to decide. 77% say they have access somewhere else. We have, there's just a range of issues to think through, and this might be best to put to the students.
I think so. And I also kind of, I reached out to SGA because I was a little concerned that, asked them to get feedback from students too and reach out. And they did submit a letter last night I can read as well about Shailene Bay's symptom.
Can you please read that letter? And I believe we did receive a letter previously from the SGA urging us to preserve the health center on campus. Is that correct? Can you remind us of the previous history there?
I wasn't here when this started.
Okay.
So I didn't receive that letter.
So I'll read the letter, and then Zach, did you also have a question?
Well, it sounds like there's a new letter. Has the board previously received a letter from the student government urging us to preserve or close the health center?
I'll have to catch up to that, Zach. I don't know who that came from.
Thank you.
Let me catch up to that.
I don't know about the letter, but when this became a big issue about a year ago, the leadership from the student government, came out in very strong support of keeping it, but I don't know about any letter to that effect.
Okay. But they came and spoke to.
Absolutely, many of them, yeah.
Of keeping the health center open.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do recall that I got here just as, I think the same week we were convening the first task force, and the student government representatives were in favor of the health clinic.
Yeah.
As a part of this discussion, do I recall correctly that there was a grant or a potential grant for mental health? Because there's been a lot of that post-COVID and the needs of students. So did we apply for that, or is there something there?
The mental health clinic does receive grant funding, and it significantly helps.
Okay.
But that's separate from the
Okay.
health clinic.
Thank you.
Go ahead and read the letter just so we have.
So this Shailene Bay Senate on behalf of the student government. Dear Vice President Coleman Joyce, we, the Student Government Association, are writing to present the findings of an investigation into the preferences of our student body regarding the health fee options for the clinic at Lane Community College. We believe that the information gathered from this investigation is critical in making informed decisions that are reflective of the students' views. A poll was conducted via Instagram where students were presented with 5 different healthcare fee options, the same ones that we just went through here. The student body, around 30 to 35 people responded over Instagram as well as in person. The student body responded decisively. Option 4 emerged as a clear leader, securing 56% of the total votes. The other options were less favorably received, with option 1 securing 33%, option 2 with 11%, option 3 with no votes at all, and option 5 also receiving 33%. Option 4 is the $50 for in-person and hybrid students, $0 for online only credit students, with an opt-in available at $50, and $400,000 from the general fund. It is evident from the poll results that a significant number of students are concerned about online students having to pay a health fee despite not attending in-person classes. This sentiment was expressed alongside the widespread belief that option 4 offers the fairest distribution of costs across all types of students. The $50 fee for in-person and hybrid students with an opt-in available for online students, coupled with a substantial general fund of $400,000 offers a balanced approach. Importantly, option 4 is only $5 more than the current fee, which is seen as a minimal impact on students while still providing necessary funds for the clinic. The Student Government Association strongly suggests the implementation of option 4. We believe it encapsulates the students' desire for fairness, minimal financial impact, and the need for a well-funded healthcare clinic. We trust that you will take the students' views into serious consideration as you review this report. The Student Government Association is ready to provide any further information or clarification that may be required. Thank you for the attention to this matter. Sincerely, Student Government Association, Lane Community College.
And that's option 3 in this graph
it's
here.
the third choice.
Yeah, it's the third
they
choice. Yeah.
changed it. Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reading it verbatim.
Yep. Understood. Steve?
Just to continue with process improvements the next time around. I get that it's a little late, that we might just have to work our way through it this time. But, my own sense is that to the extent that we can refer this to the student body, we should. And yet there's still some piece for the general fund likely to pick up. And that's our responsibility. We ought to probably make decisions about that piece, how much we would be willing to allocate out of the general fund and make that known so that students can then think about how they might want to fund the remaining piece. And I get that. I just want to put that out there as an idea for staff to think about and come back to us as to whether you think that's a good idea or whether there's, hidden problems that I'm not thinking about. And that also, I just wanted to note that while I appreciate what our, the SGA is doing here, they are also picking the one that has the highest contribution from the general fund.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Chair Fonagy, I wonder if we could kind of take a little bit of a poll of the board to see how many of the board members would actually support something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because the options in front of us, as you can tell, none of them are to close down the student clinic. It is to figure out how we pay for it. So let's I'll just start just simply by saying that option 1, the first option, is the one that I prefer because there is a little bit of skin in the game from everyone. And that's the option that really appeals to me in that. I will also note that on being a board member, it's one of the lower general fund allocations too. So I'll just admit that bias there. But that all being said, I feel like that has the greatest opportunity of giving the board, the student body, and the clinic the most options. So, Kevin, do you want to?
Excuse me, Chair Fonagy, my question was a little bit different, so I'd like to, if I could, clarify my question.
Sure.
And certainly checking in. I'm hoping that that's appropriate.
Totally, yeah.
We don't have our general counsel anymore sitting in the room with us. And
Yeah.
so we know that we have to be careful,
Yeah.
as everyone knows. But my question really was about what Board Member Mattel talked about going forward with that. What is maybe some thinking from the board about determining what allocation from the general fund would be acceptable, prudent, in the spirit of sustainability of our finances, and then giving that information to the students so that the students can make a decision to help inform their decision. And so that's what I was wondering. Just wanted to
Understood.
clarify that.
Understood. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. And I think that just a general idea of like how much out of the general fund we want to allocate to this would be beneficial in that conversation. Steve?
Just to take it a step further, Mike, I get that we need to hear what the rest of the board thinks about that idea. what I was hoping actually is for board support to ask staff to think that idea through first, because who knows what pitfalls there are hidden in that idea, equity issues that, we don't see off the top of our heads, and then, come back to us and say, yeah, that's a good idea, or actually it's not, and here's the reason why. And we might just be stuck making a bigger part of this decision than we otherwise would have wanted to. So my own recommendation is to ask staff to chew on it a little bit and then come back to us with some thoughts.
We'd be happy to do that. That will take some time and some work on our part. We'd be happy to do that. We're hoping that it's the appetite of the board to actually seriously consider that.
Seeing thumbs up. Oh, Kevin.
I have a thumbs up and a question. It seems that perhaps the student voice is important, obviously, and it seems like maybe they need some help in gathering data in a way that is more robust and would give the board better information, more complete information. I don't know if that's a possibility or if that's a dumb idea, but it just seems like perhaps we could somehow lend them a hand and say, hey, think about these sorts of ways to reach out and really get a representative sample of opinions.
Yeah. They have the ability to send an email out to the entire student body, right?
Yeah, it would probably be better to do it as a survey, I think, wouldn't it, rather than an email, or what do you think?
I don't know that we'll get a better response than we had 20%.
Gotcha.
They had the opportunity to answer all those questions. 21% answered the first section of a very long fall survey. Only 12% continued through to answer the health clinic.
Got it.
So maybe are you suggesting that it's just a survey on the health clinic,
Yes,
not with anything else?
and
We also will be running a SESI, the National SESI survey in this term also. So there becomes this fatigue effort from our students.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Pizza and survey.
It's in survey. Love it. Zach, did you have a question?
Not a question so much as just how much direction are you looking for tonight in going between these options?
We're looking to give you information, the board information during this work session, which is a discussion period. If there are questions for us, we'd like to have your questions and we can give you more information after that. Colin, did you want to add something?
Yeah, we purposely brought it to the work session so that you have time to think about it before the general meeting in a couple of weeks.
On May 1st.
And there were also the survey data from both surveys, the report from the first group that met, the findings and executive summary, all those were in the board packet to review as well.
Steve?
So then feedback in terms of where we're at now. So not about process going forward. For myself, I have a hard time supporting any of the options that include pay money from online only students. It's hard for me to justify that, so that one's hard for me. And the other thing is I think where we're moving towards is, a ratcheting down of the general fund contribution, right? Exactly where it lands, I don't know. That's the board decision, but it's at some 450,000 or something like that. We heard over the last couple of years, and we feel like we're, over budgeted there. And so, so there may be some further discussion this year and next year as to where that ultimately lands. But I would think if we feel that as a board, we're going to ratchet that down, we ought to do some of that this year, right? So we ought to therefore not accept 400,000 and move towards something less than that so that we're stepping down to wherever it is we ultimately want to end. Those would be my two thoughts in terms of what we do this year.
Zach?
I think my thinking is somewhat similar to Steve's in that whether students pay through the student fee or through tuition that then they pay through the general fund. Either way, they're paying for this. And for me, it makes more sense probably to do it through the fee than to continue to do it through the general fund. So I think, yeah, figuring out how to slowly ratchet that down over time would make sense. I don't have super strong feelings on the online paying versus not, but I think I fall on similarly that they probably shouldn't pay. And so, yeah, I think those are two general parameters that I would also be supportive of.
One thing that the task force used in their calculation that I'm not seeing here is enrollment increases. And with enrollment increases, there's potentially a greater need for student health services and so forth, plus additional revenues that could be used towards investing in the student health clinic. So with that, though, depending on where the enrollments are, whether it's in person or online or both, that gives us more, that gives our students and our student health clinic more financial options if we have an online fee of some kind. So, and again, like the increased enrollment was, it was one of the recommendations in the task force proposals, but I'm not seeing it here. But that being said, I think that's something else to consider for those who are not necessarily for an online fee, that if we see enrollment increases, that that would create additional financial resources as a higher population of students that we need to serve with this health clinic grows. I hope that makes sense.
More people, we don't have to raise the fee as much.
That is, yeah, exactly. And that's something, yeah, that was something else that, what was it? It was option 2 here that calculated just a 5% increase in enrollments, it looks like. So that's just something to consider, I guess. And that's just something I would love to know in the numbers.
Is this the last slide? I think I have one
No,
sort
there
of
is one more.
okay, overarching question. at the end.
We got caught up. If we could go to the next one. This was this was part of the this went out in fall as a survey. So this was just the recommendations from the task force were in spring. So the questions are a little bit different. These were from the first group that met and they went out. So you'll see a little bit there. What's interesting in this, if you look at the extremely unlikely and the very unlikely, add those together, like each one versus the extremely likely and the very likely. What I found with this one is that, you know, students are not expressing a strong preference for an increased health clinic fee and are motivated by the lost cost per term. And the balance between those students responding that they'd be unlikely to pay and likely to pay is fairly similar here. It was just kind of a flat, this one. So
yeah. You're saying I don't have to figure this thing out.
No.
You're getting a bunch of nothing out of this one.
I know. I'm blaming. Yeah, I've gotten better at math since I worked here. And so I think this was the final slide in that one, but then we have one other thing we added after this. Isn't the health clinic, but this is the end of the health clinic.
How many hours a week is the health clinic open, please?
4 days a week.
8 hours each of those days. So it's a 32-hour week. Okay. Thank you.
All right. So obviously over time on this one, but Zach, go ahead.
Well, so is there one more slide? And then I have a follow-up question at the end.
Yeah. So this is, Don?
We done with the health clinic?
What's that next?
Let me clarify. It's open 5 days a week for like appointment scheduling, things like that. 4 days a week for clinical services.
So I imagine you have data that lets you know which days or hours are the greater use, or is it stay pretty?
Variable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a deposit we are proposing. It says fee, but really what we are proposing is a deposit. Since 2020, but really more around 2022, Lane Community College and our other community college partners across the state and also in California, Washington, and others have experienced a significant increase in fraudulent applications. And when we automated our new application software in 2022, June of 2022, we saw some real progress with the automation of that and quick turnaround times. And shortly after we turned that automation on, we started seeing fraudulent applications flying through the system. We came in one day and our CRM administrator says, "Whoa, we have literally 1,000 applications more in the system from Friday to Monday," and we knew something was wrong. So we started investigating, and what we have found over the course of the last couple of years is that this fraudulent activity has increased. It's become more aggressive to the point where our sections are filling. Faculty are having to track no-show drop rates more intently than they ever have before. They are being contacted by these fraudulent students, making up false narratives that students are contacting the registrar's office and trying to get back into classes. And so it's really become a significant problem with our systems. And because we have an open access policy, it's easier for these fraudulent applications to get through. Right now, we have a staff member, basically 40 hours a week, dedicated to looking at every single one of these applications that comes through. It's incredibly onerous. It takes a lot of time. And the staff from IT and our admissions, enrollment services, faculty, the financial aid, the admins, so many people are involved. We did develop a fraudulent task force that's been looking at this over the course of the last 2 years. And we, no matter how we try to combat this, they just keep finding ways around it. So we are recommending, it's actually a little bit more than $10, $25 application deposit. So students would actually get this money sort of credited to their account once they register for classes. It would not apply to College Now, Early College, ABSE, ESL. These are not the populations that these fraudulent people are targeting, and just anybody that is a credit is really where this would apply. And again, it would be credited to their account. Central Oregon Community College is right now the only community college in Oregon that has an application fee. It used to be on registration, but what they learned was that they were also starting to see an increase. Once they moved that application deposit or fee from the registration to the actual application process, they stopped seeing this activity, and they see very, very few coming through. So they have far less fraudulent applications than us. Mount Hood Community College, Chemeketa, all of my partners in this are really, really struggling. And so we are hoping that in order to alleviate some of this, we can encourage this deposit that'll be applied to the student's account. Applicants that attend a Reg Fest or visit campus, when we go to high school visits, we have ways around this so that students won't have to pay the deposit if they do attend these events, or if we go into the high schools or things like that. So we have incorporated some things to work around it, but anyone who can't sort of authenticate or verify their identity, we would want to apply this.
Zach, you had a question? How much is COCC's fee?
$25.
Also 25. And then at the beginning of this presentation, you noted the enrollment one-time fee of $30 going to $31. Should we just combine these two things?
No. And here's why. So this is really on the front end of things before students actually come to the institution. That $30 to $31 fee is only for students who start at the institution, and it really gets applied towards something completely different, which is the diploma processing. This would really be kind of an entry level deposit that we would credit to the student's account.
When do students pay the $30 or $31 fee?
Their very first time that they enroll at the institution.
So after they register.
After they register, that's correct. And this would be before they register.
All right, Denise, then Steve.
Is $25 enough for all the problems and hassle and workload and everything that, I mean, in the work-life environment, we often have to put a deposit down on something to show our good faith intention, et cetera, and it's getting credited back to the account. So is $25 enough?
Looks like $10 enough. Yeah.
Well, we originally thought $10, and then I attended the CSSA meeting last week, I think it was Friday, and found out the COCC was charging 25. And what we thought is we wanted to be equitable with the other community colleges, because I think Mount Hood and PCC, they're looking at doing the same thing. They're actually looking at doing kind of possibly a front end ID verification thing. However, you know, when you think in equity lens, DACA students, Dreamer students will struggle with that, and it'd be a serious barrier for them. So,
Yeah. And just to clarify, it's $10 though, right?
No, it's 25.
We were talking 10, but we would like to do 25.
Okay, gotcha.
We'd like to make it the
We
same
wanna-
as our counterparts.
We'd already submitted this by the CSSA meeting.
Understood. Steve, then Kevin?
Just 2 points. First off, I understand the fee is not to sort of pay for processing of fraudulent applications, but to prevent them altogether, right? Why would somebody
That's
who's hoping to, make a buck, fork over 25 up front and then and hope to get through? So anyways, I'm 100% for it. And then I would just ask you to think about all the other little ways that you could, once you know somebody is for real, but like you say, you go to the high schools, you see them, they're real, to investigate whether other options there are to waive the fee in those cases. So like returning students, right? Once you've paid it once, you re-enroll the next term, you should not have to pay that fee, right? We should trust, there's no reason to worry about those students.
That's right.
So,
That's right. Yeah. Once we've identified that you are who you say you are, we're not going to charge that to you again. And we have worked really hard on creating sort of a code that the schools can use, our high school partners again, and other campus partners that we're going to be helping them use this code so that fee can be waived.
Yeah, I think this will solve your problem. So
I hope so.
yeah.
And if I can add, there's two things as well. One, the four-year institutions are not seeing this in the same way because they have a big application and deposit fee and things like that. It is the community colleges that get hammered. And so this is, I would say, to me, it's crucial. It allows us, we're trying to be a high touch institution. The more time we can spend on our real students, the better. And we're taking people away from doing that. And we're doing our real students a disservice. And so this has proved effective. I will say there's a couple of caveats to not every community college in Oregon, like Tillamook Bay, Oregon Coast Community College. They're such small communities. Everybody knows the students. So they don't have the fraudulent problem.
Yeah. Kevin?
I just would like to add my support. It seems like a great idea. And the next wave of fraud, which you've probably heard about, are the Pell Grant students who show up, attend a class or two, and then jet.
And that's what they're doing. This is all for financial aid fraud.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's what this is about. That's their motive. And one last thing I wanted to mention, a couple of community colleges are talking about, other options up front, and they're looking Without this, we're creating more barriers. How are we going to change when they change doing this? Like high school transcripts, they're falsifying high school transcripts. They look exactly the same. Every time we make a change, we're trying to put another barrier in place, and it's slowing down our ability to give a quick response. You've been accepted. You're in. We're going one by one. And we've got the automated systems we've paid money for, Target X, that allows us to accept students quickly, move them forward, get them involved and get them communications going out. As it is right now, we're not being competitive in bringing those students in.
Any more slides or?
That was it.
That's it. You had an overall question, Zach?
Yeah, putting all of this together, all of the fees, what would be the average expected, like the increase for an average student? You don't have to answer right now, but maybe for the next meeting, if you can add all of them up and say it's gonna, go from 200 to 205 altogether, and it's this percentage increase. And then we've seen a previous graph where we looked at our tuition plus fees compared to other institutions. And so if we can just get any sense of if this changes our placing in that. Thank you.
Yeah, and we could also do it we could do that. We can also maybe give examples of what the different health clinic fee recommendations, also what difference that would make for each one.
Thank you.
All right, and we're scheduled to vote on this May 1st, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. And that's it?
That's it for this presentation.
Perfect.
I was
Great.
pulling up the mic for the next one.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that. Next, we got the stick welding and the wire welding. We'll go ahead and combine those just to save time.
Yes, Dr. Tinkham will come to the podium and she'll talk about the 2 welding certificates.
Good evening, everyone. We have 2 certificates for your consideration this evening. Both of them are 2 very short, small certificates, what we call stackable credits. One is in stick welding and the other one is in wire welding. I learned that stick welding is with a stick and a wire is with a wire. And I probably will not be able to recognize them, but there is, the wire welding is more of an advanced technique. Both of these areas are needed with our machining and welding students, and it gives them a skill base that can help them get a job as they are pursuing their associate degree. All of these courses already exist except one as part of our associate degree that already exists. So really it's a repackaging of what we're doing. Again, we're trying to stack these credits in a way that's really useful to the students so they can start working immediately. Unfortunately, the 2 faculty members who worked on this proposal, both of them are unavailable today. They were the ones who, shepherded this through the curriculum approval process. But with me, I have Grant Matthews, who's our AVP of Workforce Development, and he is going to say a few words about these 2 programs.
Thank you. Shelley did a great job explaining them. So my few words are there any questions?
Right off the bat, would this qualify for the WIOA fund list and so forth? Because I believe there were certain criteria that was particular for welding that WIOA had something to do.
We will need to submit them to the list, the ETPL list, but we don't anticipate any issues with that as we put them forward.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And because it's stackable, they could pursue this. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yep. Denise?
So does this practice happen in a lab setting with particular equipment? And is this the kind of schedule that would be like once a week or a couple times a week? Can you tell me a little bit more about how this works?
Yeah, so the way these certificates work is that it's using coursework from both our welding fabrication program and coursework from our CNC machining program. So a student in either the welding program or the CNC program would seek classes in the other program to round out their learning to be able to combine the skill set. We see a lot in different areas where additive and subtractive manufacturing are combined to create complex objects for different applications throughout the industry. And this gives a skill set of showing students how you weld pieces together and then how you machine them down to the precise instrument that you need. And so it's combining those two skill sets. So a student in welding and fabrication might take an additional few courses in the CNC program in order to round out that skill set. Likewise, a student in the machining program might go over and take several courses with the welding program to learn that skill set, and then they're able to combine those skills in some short segments. So in that aspect, it already matches their current scheduling. And there's no added courses to the schedule. They just take them as they're available, and it does align with their schedules, and it is done in a lab situation in both instances.
So just as a follow-up, for example, if I'm a rural student and I'm looking for these badges or certificates, I just want to get this certificate. Is that an option, or what I heard you saying is it is combined with a larger program?
You can get just one of these certificates, yes.
Mike?
About how long would it take a student to get one of those certificates?
These certificates are 45 credit certificates, so about, no, excuse me, 14. I just reversed them. So you're looking at 6-month certificates.
Zach?
I sent in some questions last night. I don't know if you saw them yet, but I did. Yeah. So just sometime in the next 2 weeks, if you have a time to look at it. So we already have a number of welding, a 2-year AAS, and that for, I believe it's welding and manufacturing of
Fabrication,
fabrication. As there's a 2-year welding and fabrication, there's a 1-year welding and fabrication, and there's a 1-year welding certificate. Is there a way to set this up so that a student earning one of those 1 or 2-year certificates would just automatically earn this along the way?
Yes.
Rather than having to take an additional class that is not included in their core curriculum for the 1 or 2-year program?
So that's the way that stackable credentials work, is that they're built within the larger degrees that exist. The unique aspect of these is that students, you would have to select some additional courses. Many times stackable credentials also include different variations and options. And we saw this a couple of months ago when we presented on the culinary programs in baking and the other in culinary arts, where you provide them some small options. Those small options may include 1 or 2 classes that are outside their norm that add a great skill set to what they're earning. So it may be a small offshoot, but it's still packaged within the larger degree that they're earning, or they stand alone as certificates. We're seeing this a lot in applications of stackable credentials with career technical programs, where a lot of our employers are looking for skill sets. They're not as interested in degrees, they're interested in skill sets. And so we're finding opportunities and ways to provide the students the skill sets that the employers are looking for, and the combinations of skill sets that they're looking for, and fitting it within the collegiate environment that we're in with degrees, certificates, and other credentialing. And we do find that the credentials themselves do add for upward mobility to the students and add to that ability for the student to transition from one workplace to another more fully.
Yeah, it looked like, so it looked like a 1-year welding student in the welding processes class would essentially, they would take stick welding, they would take wire welding, but they wouldn't have the CNC machining class, and they wouldn't have the shop safety class. And so I just, if there's anything we can do to make it as easy as possible for those 1-year welding process students to just get this along the way, so that they can start working and start earning money, I think that'd be very valuable. And then the flip side is we currently have a stick welding program and a wire welding program that are also about 16 credits that result, it looks like they result in a certification with the American Welding Society. Can you talk about the value of having 2 16-credit wire welding programs and 2 16-credit stick welding programs where one gets you a certification and one doesn't necessarily?
So the difference is in the level of specification that the students are looking for. The 16 credit programs that are in stick welding and wire welding specifically, or if they were to add on a few of the CNC classes, they would add on that additional skill set, and it would be a part of, or could be a part of that 16 credit process. In the machining aspect, there might be we're continuing to develop the machining curriculum. There might be an option where a student learning CNC is then looking at the stick welding or wire welding skill set or the aspect of it and doing that. The difference really is in the depth of skill. And when you're looking at the specific stick welding and wire welding 16 credit certificates that are going for the certification or the national certification piece, those delve more deeply into the welding skill itself rather than the larger applications between industries.
Okay, it just as, you know, if I was a potential student and I was looking at these two programs, they both require, I forget the exact numbers, but essentially level 1 and level 2 of wire welding or arc welding. And then, you know, this program, it's going to require, you know, shop basics and CNC, whereas the other one requires like geometry for technology plus this course that then results in the credential. I don't know if I would know which one to choose. And so I just, you know, maybe look at that and just think,
Yeah.
you know,
So-
is there overlap here? Which one should people take? Do we need both?
Yeah, some of that is definitely in the format with which we present these based on what we submit to the state is as they appear as standalone options when in fact they are much broader in their application. And as students take courses, that accumulation of courses applies to those certificates in that stackable realm.
It just seems that there's a lot of overlap with
Yep.
those existing short-term programs. I just want us to
Yeah.
double check and
Take a look at it.
I appreciate that.
So that it's very clear to the student, because I'm in agreement. If
Yeah.
there's confusion, we need to make sure that the student knows what they're getting themselves into.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just one other question. Are any of these short-term certificate programs offered on Saturdays?
At this time, they are not.
Is that something that's being looked at?
We continue to explore with our programs where students are requesting classes and how we can best fill those. At this point in time, I know like for example, the welding and fabrication program, their credit program, many of the students are taking classes Monday through Thursday, and then they are employed with fabrication companies Friday, Saturday, Sunday, putting their skill set to work. And that's some things that our faculty have worked very hard to put in place. So the credit programs in welding and fabrication have designed it very specifically with weekends off so that their students can go and work during that time.
It's like an internship in a way?
Kind of like an extended internship
Oh.
type of thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? All right. Tina, thank you so much. Look forward to voting on that next week or next meeting. Speaking of next meetings, so we have future meeting dates. May is a busy month for us. So we have May 1st, May 8th, and May 15th. The May 8th is a board budget committee meeting. And the 15th is our work session. So yeah, in regards to future meeting dates and so forth, I want to state that we're going to be having additional conversations about what you mentioned and what would be the best path forward to pursue the question of 1 to 2 meeting dates. Thank you for the informational questions about that as well, especially around the committees. Because I didn't know that about the history of it. There was committees before the work sessions that would meet separately. And yeah, that was really good to know that history. Yeah, so that is in regards to the future meeting dates. Any additional board comments or questions? Seeing none, we are going to move to adjournment. We don't have an executive session, right? And no executive session, so we'll move to adjourn.